The day they betrayed you was the day your real life began. Not because something ended, but because something inside you finally broke free from illusion. It didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like collapse, like the ground disappeared beneath everything you trusted. One moment you were standing inside a story where loyalty was real, love was safe, and people meant what they said. The next moment you were staring at something you could no longer unsee. A message, a lie, a silence that lasted too long, a truth that arrived too late. And suddenly, the person you built emotional safety around became the reason you lost it. But here's what most people never realize. Betrayal is not the event that changes your life. It is the moment your illusion of life dies. And when illusion dies, reality begins to speak. At first, reality feels cruel, cold, unfair. You don't just lose a person, you lose the version of them you were living inside. You don't just lose trust, you lose the idea that trust was ever guaranteed. And that creates a terrifying question. If I was wrong about them, what else have I been wrong about? That question doesn't just disturb you, it rebuilds you. Because betrayal doesn't just break relationships, it exposes perception. And once perception cracks, you can either fall into bitterness or step into awareness. And what happens next decides everything, because this is where your real life quietly begins. Even though it feels like everything is ending, most people don't suffer because reality is painful. They suffer because reality refuses to match the story they were emotionally invested in. Before betrayal, you weren't just loving a person, you were loving an interpretation, a projection shaped by hope, attachment, memory, and desire. Carl Jung explained this clearly in his idea of projection. We don't see people as they are. We see them as we are emotionally prepared to see them. So when betrayal happens, it doesn't just expose them, it exposes your projection. And that collapse feels like identity loss, because suddenly you're not just dealing with what they did, you're dealing with what you believed. The strange part is that most people don't miss the person. They miss the version of life they were building around that person, the future they imagined, the emotional safety they assumed, the meaning they attached to it all. And when that future disappears, the mind goes into shock. At first, nothing makes sense. You replay everything. You search for the moment it changed. You look for hidden clues that prove it wasn't real, or wasn't your fault, because uncertainty is harder than pain. Nietzsche once suggested that humans don't just want truth, we want meaning. Even painful meaning feels better than chaos. So the mind creates stories. I should have seen it. They never cared. I was fooled. But here's the hidden truth. Closure is often just a more comfortable illusion, because reality is rarely clean. People are rarely one thing. Betrayal is rarely planned in the way we imagine, and that's what makes it unbearable, but also what makes it transformative. Because when illusion breaks, clarity enters. You start noticing patterns you ignored. Words don't impress you anymore. Actions become your language, and slowly your perception upgrades. The version of you that trusted blindly begins to disappear, and something new begins forming. Not softer, stronger, not naive, aware, but awareness comes with pain, because now you see what you didn't want to see. And once you see it, you cannot fully unsee it. That is the moment illusion dies. But what replaces it is not peace, it is self-reflection. And that is where the real transformation begins. After betrayal, the focus shifts inward. Not because you want it to, but because your mind demands answers. Why did I allow this? Why didn't I notice? Why did I trust so deeply? This is where people either evolve or collapse. Because betrayal doesn't just break trust in others. It tests trust in yourself. Marcus Aurelius, who lived surrounded by political betrayal, didn't ask how to control others. He asked how to control perception. Because he understood one truth: you cannot control who deceives you, but you can control what you become afterward. But most people choose protection instead of growth. They confuse healing with emotional shutdown. They build walls and call it wisdom. They stop trusting and call it experience. But that's not strength. That's frozen pain. And frozen pain doesn't disappear. It just becomes personality. This is where bitterness is born. A bitter person starts generalizing pain. People always leave. Trust is stupid. Everyone betrays eventually. But a wise person asks something different. What in me made me vulnerable to ignoring reality? That question is uncomfortable, but powerful, because it shifts control back to you. Viktor Frankl said the last human freedom is the ability to choose your response. Betrayal forces that choice. You can become harder or deeper. You can close off or become more precise. You can lose faith or refine it. And here's the paradox. The strongest people are not those who never trusted. They are those who learned how to trust without abandoning themselves. Because the real danger was never trust. It was blind trust without boundaries. And once you learn that difference, everything changes. You stop chasing closure from people who caused confusion. You stop explaining yourself to those who misunderstood you on purpose or through carelessness. And slowly, something shifts. You are no longer trying to get your old life back. You are building a new understanding of life itself. But the mind still has another battlefield waiting, a deeper one, a quieter one, and most people never even realize it exists. After betrayal, your mind replays everything, not to heal you, but to control uncertainty. Because uncertainty feels like danger. So the brain chooses pain. It understands over a future it cannot predict. You replay conversations. You analyze tone. You reconstruct moments. You search for hidden meanings. But the truth is painful. There is often no perfect explanation. People are not always deep villains or innocent victims. Most betrayal is human complexity, fear, ego, confusion, impulse, avoidance, and the mind struggles with that ambiguity. Epictetus said we are disturbed not by events, but by interpretation of events, and interpretation becomes your battlefield. Was it my fault? Was I not enough? Did they ever care? These questions don't lead to answers. They lead to loops, and loops create identity. This is where survival mode begins. You start scanning for danger everywhere. Silence becomes rejection. Distance becomes betrayal. Kindness becomes suspicion. And slowly your world shrinks. Not because reality changed, but because your perception did. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes the color of its thoughts. If betrayal becomes your dominant thought, everything begins to look like betrayal. But there is another path, the path of observation instead of identification. Instead of, why did this happen? You ask, what is happening inside me right now? And that shift breaks the loop, not instantly, but gradually, because attention is energy. Whatever you feed grows, and when you stop feeding the replay, it begins to fade. You are not forgetting, you are detaching. And in that detachment, something unexpected happens. You stop being the person who was hurt and start becoming the person who understands hurt. But even that is not the final stage, because there is one truth most people never accept, and it changes everything about how you see relationships. At some point, you have to face a difficult truth. Not everyone who leaves you is a villain. Not everyone who hurts you is aware of the depth of your pain, and not everyone who betrays you is acting from a calculated place of evil. Sometimes people fail emotionally. Sometimes they are inconsistent. Sometimes they love imperfectly. Sometimes they choose themselves in ways you didn't expect. And while that doesn't excuse betrayal, it removes the fantasy of perfect humans, because the truth is, no one is as stable as you thought they were, and that includes you. This realization is uncomfortable because it removes certainty from relationships, but it gives you something far more valuable: maturity. Because now you stop building expectations on perfection. You start building awareness around reality. You stop assuming permanence. You start valuing presence. And this is where Stoicism becomes real-life practice, not detachment from emotion, but clarity within emotion. You no longer define yourself by who stayed or who left. You define yourself by how you respond, and slowly something powerful happens. The betrayal loses its emotional dominance. It becomes a chapter, not the entire book. And when that happens, something extraordinary emerges. Freedom, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from understanding. One day, you will look back at the person who betrayed you and realize something strange. They didn't destroy your life. They interrupted it, because the life you were living before was based on assumptions that were never fully stable. And the pain you felt wasn't just loss, it was awakening. You didn't just lose someone, you lost illusion. You lost blindness. You lost dependency on certainty that never existed. And in that loss, something else appeared. Self-awareness, strength, emotional precision, the ability to see people as they are, not as you hope them to be. And here is the deepest truth of all. The person who betrayed you may have ended one version of your story, but they also forced you into the beginning of your real one. Because real life doesn't begin in comfort, it begins in clarity, and clarity is born from collapse. So when you think back to that day, don't only ask what they took from you, ask what illusion finally died inside you, because the moment it died, you were no longer the same person, and that is where your real life quietly began.